I'm Evan Feigenbaum, the Vice President for Asia at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And this is one chapter in a multi-part video series on 6 crises and how the United States and China, despite their deep and abiding strategic rivalry, nonetheless managed to coordinate. The current outbreak of the coronavirus known as COVID-19 has an eerie precursor. In 2003, another respiratory illness caused by a coronavirus, severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, also broke out in China and began to spread around Asia and then around the world, including to North America. Tommy Thompson, a former 4-term governor of Wisconsin, was serving as Secretary of Health and Human Services in the first term of the George W. Bush administration. And he became the American point person for dealing with China to stop SARS and deal with the contagion effects of the crisis. We talked to him about that period, what he remembered about the Chinese response, what the United States was concerned with, how the negotiations proceeded, what happened when China changed health ministers in midstream, what was hard, what was easy, and what lessons policymakers today in both Washington and Beijing should draw from that prior experience in 2003. Here's what he told us.
I think President Bush did a great job of developing a very fertile and communicative style with the President Jiang Zemin, but I think it was, at that time, it was trust but verify. He just truly didn't trust him. We caught him in several mistruths about SARS. They just plain misinterpreted deliberately, what was going on in Guangdong province and what they found out about this disease. And they didn't want. I asked. I still remember this conversation with the first Minister of Health, Evan. I called him up and I says, "Can I send my doctors from CDC over? We would like to come and visit and meet with your doctors." He says, "Not necessary, Secretary Thompson. We got it under control. We don't need any outside doctors at the present time. Nothing's going to happen. Everything is under control." And they deliberately refused to allow us to send our doctors from CDC over to China to meet with their doctors about SARS. And then they told us some stories that it was under control. There was only a few incidents. Can't remember. Handful of incidents, and it spread from there very quickly. And then we knew we had a real problem, and China was not going to be helpful. We had to find it out ourselves. So then Julie Gerberdine and I set up a meeting to go over to China and talk about it more and meet with Madam Wu, and it was completely different. The first meeting in Washington, D.C. in my office with Madam Wu was very stilted, very direct, very controlled. But the meeting in China, on the other hand, which was much longer, we had by this time got SARS somewhat under control. She was very open, very friendly, and thought it would be a great idea to have better communications health-wise so we wouldn't have this problem before. And she was the one that drove it on the Chinese side. And you could tell she was so high up in the Communist Party and the government that when she spoke, she didn't have to check with anybody else. So it was to her advantage and to the Chinese advantage for us to have a good working relationship, to move from finger pointing, saying you didn't tell us this, you wouldn't let us share any information with your doctors, you were absolutely closed-mouthed about it, and as a result of that, SARS got out of control. We could have done a better job and probably contained it where it was. If we could have had our doctors go over there and meet with their doctors. So she knew that Chinese had screwed up. There was no question about it. She never admitted it, never once said, the China government was culpable, the Communist Party was culpable. But you could tell body language, no matter what, she was aware that China had screwed up on SARS. And so her position was, sure, let's have doctors have a better exchange. Let's have CDC which is the gold standard, come into China. Let's allow your doctors to meet more with us, because that took away the false premise that they had put forth at the beginning, that there was no problem. And they knew there was a problem. They had misstated the facts tremendously and tried to close the loop so that people would know the facts. And they knew that, and they got, blasted in the international press. And so she wanted to change that as quickly as possible. So to her advantage, and to the Chinese and the communist advantage, they wanted us to come in and have medical exchanges and CDC exchanges, because it would help them quell the false assumptions that the international press had about the Chinese. So it was to her advantage to do this. And she was very open, but she never once admitted that China had ever made a mistake. Never once. It was always, no, we didn't make a mistake. And when I brought up the fact, Evan, that I understand the reason you were so closed-mouthed about it was the fact that you were going to have the Communist plenary session the next month. I can't remember. I think this was in January this was all taking place, and I think that the plenary session was going to be in February or March, and they didn't want anything to spoil it. And the international press was spoiling it. So she wanted that behind her, but she would never, Madame Wu was not the type of person to ever accept any blame. Secretary Rumsfeld and Secretary Powell both were somewhat suspicious of the Chinese. Rumsfeld much more so than Powell. And I still can remember when I was debriefed after my meetings with Wu, with the president, and with Rumsfeld and with Powell, that Powell was willing to listen, but Rumsfeld says, can't believe it, straightforward, you can't believe what they're saying. But I found that Washington was very skeptical about the Chinese-American relationship. Bush was not. Bush was like his father in that regard. Bush wanted to see if he could build a positive Chinese relationship. I think it was probably Father Bush's familiarity with the Chinese, his involvement with George W., that they thought that would be much better to develop a thing. And I think that's why George W. invited President Jiang Zemin to Crawford, to the ranch, to see if they could really develop a personal relationship. And I think George W. Bush, to this day, thinks that they did. And I think they did too. But when I was involved with the health crisis, I found that I could trust Madame Wu. I cannot trust the first Minister of Health, because he was told to deliberately not say anything and not tell the truth. And so it's pretty hard, to develop a relationship or develop any honest debate when the person that you're debating was told not to tell you anything. and if you did say anything, it had to be stilted to their point of view, which was not correct. And we knew that. And so it was just sort of spinning your wheels nicely. I mean, we always had tea and laughed and talked about other things that Minister of Health was doing, but not anything directly with relationships of America. But I never really, under the Bush administration, really thought the relationships were that bad with China. The SARS was bad, but I think it was a combination of the plane accident, the fighter plane. I think it was the fact that they were going to have their plenary session of the Communist Party, which I think was probably more relevant than anything. And I think that they didn't want any international bad press prior, during, and immediately after that session. So their comments were completely controlled by the Communist Party. And that had an impact on our relationship. But once Madame Wu got in there and she could see that the criticism was going to get worse unless they were in a cooperative spirit, she just cut to the chase and said, yeah, bring your doctors over, bring Julie over, let's set up a CDC office and let's work together. And that once they did that and said they wanted to be open about it, and work together so this would never happen again, the international mood changed too, Evan. Well, I traveled to China, I think, 2 or 3 times as governor. And I developed a great friendship with the mayor of Shanghai, who later became the deputy prime minister, and he completely redid the city. And one of the smartest men I've ever met. And I had when I went there the first time, we had a dinner in his office, and overlooking downtown. We had really a difficult time getting to his office because of the traffic. And he says, Governor, says, the next time you come to Shanghai, I'm going to have this whole area redone. And I thought to myself, I mean, there's thousands of people that are going to go through there. And they built, if you remember correctly, they just went in and bulldozed a bunch of houses down and built those elevated huge highways from the airport into downtown Shanghai. And got a modern transportation system, and you go from the airport to downtown. And so I saw him after that. I said, I see you completely redone it. I said, I wish, I don't know how you did it with all the people. And he says, that's the communist way. He was very honest with me, and they redid that, and we developed a close relationship. And then when I was governor, I became the head of the Governors Association, and I took, I think, 8 or 10 governors to China, to Beijing, and at that time, Xu Wenji was the second in command. And I asked him if he would see me, and I don't know if he remembered or if he was, well, I think both. But anyway, he remembered having been with me twice. And he said, sure, I'll meet with you governors. He said, but I'm only going to talk to the head governor, meaning me. And he said, I'll give you 15 minutes. An hour later, we were still talking. And he was telling me how the free enterprise system was helping, how they were the capitalists, and we were starting to sell property and develop property and business and employment. And I said, I still remember that. I said, you sound just like a capitalist, UNG. And he said, and I still remember him shaking his finger. He said, oh, no. We practice free enterprise with a communist bent. And he never gave that up, but it was a fantastic meeting. So I thoroughly enjoyed meeting with the Chinese. I've always thought that they were straightforward, wanted to do business with the states in the United States, and we had signed many contracts with businesses from Wisconsin and China, and they're still in existence today. So I started this long time before Scott Walker ever went to China. I was not so foreign to the Chinese way when I came over as Minister of Health. So in regards to the lessons, you got to the Chinese are, you got to push. Chinese do not like timidity. Chinese do not like you holding back. Chinese likes, I have always found that they want to know exactly what you feel and so on, and don't be afraid to tell them. And I think you got to be aggressive. I think that's what Trump is. I think Trump is very aggressive with the Chinese, and I think they respond to that aggressiveness as long as it's somewhat fair-handed, because the Chinese will never give 50% to your side. They always take 80% and give you 20%. That's always going in. They want the biggest slice, and you got to push back and you got to stand firm. And once you do, you can usually get the 50% that you want. And so the lessons to be learned is that you got to stand up, and you got to, like we did in SARS, you got to stand up and demand that they be open. And I think the Secretary of Health and Human Services The government right now has just got to say to China, we can never have this again. This has caused almost a collapse of the economy worldwide. And so when you have a disease, it's going to spread. Let's face it. And so sooner we get at it, it's the best for you in China. It's the best for Japan. It's the best for all the Asian countries, but it's also best for the United States and Europe. And we got to join together. There's going to be other pandemics. There's going to be other viruses that are going to come to the forefront. That's just the way it is. This is not the last one. And so I can still remember, Evan, when I left the department, my closing exit interview, I said, the one thing I'm worried about, I had a pandemic plan. And I said, the worst thing in the world that I'm concerned about is someday we're going to have another pandemic virus. I said, it's probably going to be a bird flu or something like that. And I said, we're going to have to. And I said, what we need to do in order to protect America is we need to make sure we have surge capacity in our hospitals. We have to have ventilators and masks and all of our necessary capacity for a huge pandemic in our strategic stockpiles. And I had written this out and I put it into a plan and gave it to the country in 2005, and that plan is still there. Tony Fauci helped me develop it. And so the pandemic plan of 2005 said, was encapsulated what I had said, that the worst thing in the world for America would be some sort of a pandemic virus going worldwide, which it has. I'm not sure if the Secretary of Health and Human Services or the Vice President has called the people in Wuhan province about this disease. I don't know, but I know one thing. I was on the telephone a lot in the month of December and January when this first came out, talking to the Minister of Health and to people that would talk to me over there to find out how extensive it was. And so maybe it's just the way I am or not, but I think you have to. The Chinese you have to develop a communication with the Chinese, as you know, and you have to call them on a regular basis, and especially on a health crisis. You have to be there and you have to talk to them, and you have to talk to the Minister of Health and find out. And I don't know if they're talking to them or not. I really don't know, but they should be. And CDC should be over there and talking to them, and I don't think they are. But I think if I would have been secretary, I would have gone to Wuhan province myself with the CDC director and taken some of my doctors over there and sat down. I really think you have to do that when you have a crisis like this. This is serious, and you have to know how. You can see things, and if you're there on their ground, in their territory, you can get information that you couldn't get over the telephone. So I think it's imperative that we develop closer relationships to the international community, and especially to China. And anytime there's a breakout of any kind of disease, the secretary and CDC director have got to go to China and talk to the Minister of Health and to the doctors over there. I think that's just an imperative. I think that's a lesson to be learned and should be followed up on in any future administrations, and especially if they should go over and see and reconnoiter what's taken place now since the breakout and see what they're doing. See, because everybody else tells me, and I assume that they're correct, they're the experts, is that this is going to come back in the fall. It's ridiculous that this great country we call America and our home is got a supply chain problem. I mean, we're the ones that develop supply chains. Going back, to the manufacturing revolution in the turn of the century, that's how we developed it, was a supply chain. And you got to have control of your medicines. I mean, if there's anything you have to have control over, it's the ingredients for your medicine. To have to depend upon India and China and other countries for the basic ingredients of whatever it be, insulin or quinine capsules right now, not to have control of that, it's just wrong. America's got to bring that back home. Number one, you got to talk to the Chinese, and you got to go over there and talk to them and see it firsthand. They'll be much more revealing if you meet them on their territory face to face. That's number one. Number two, you got to bring all those basic ingredients for our health supply back to America. It's absolutely imperative.